For 40 years, Moses has been a shepherd in the backside of the desert in this town called Midian, working for his father-in-law named Jethro. Life had become very predictable, and then one day he sees a bush that is burning, but it is not consumed. He goes over to investigate, and God speaks to him and calls him on this assignment to free his people from slavery in the land of Egypt. 2 to 3 million of his people had been slaves for hundreds of years in Egypt, and so Moses obeys God, reluctantly, but he obeys. And the people are freed out of Egypt after the 10 plagues and the Passover, and then it's time to make their way to the Promised Land. Well, this seems like it would be the easy part of the assignment, because from Egypt to Canaan, the Promised Land, we're not talking about a really difficult trip. I mean, it's a distance of maybe 175 miles. I pulled up on the map exactly what we'd be looking at here. It would be this little journey here. Not too bad. In fact, it's actually a very scenic route as you travel along the Mediterranean Sea, and it's a popularly traveled road. And I'm sure as the people thought about leaving Egypt and going to the Promised Land, everyone assumed we'll be taking this way. We'll be taking the road called the Way of the Sea. It'll be the direct route that God surely would take us on. 175 miles shouldn't be too bad. I wanted to get a frame of reference on this for us, and so I pulled up on the GPS of my phone what we're talking about. It'd be like going from Louisville to Nashville, and it's a distance of 183.2 miles. It says here, and this is if you hit the hiking icon, which I didn't even know existed until recently, it should take 2 days and 12 hours. I'm like, well, that's pretty aggressive. Well, that's if you don't stop. So if you stop along the way, so you average 20-ish miles a day, I mean, you're looking at what? A week and a half tops. And so for the people, as they leave Egypt, they're in pretty good shape. They're slaves, right? And they're hoofing it, and they've got everything that they have, all their belongings. So you think, okay, well, maybe a month tops. But it'll be a nice trip. It'll be a nice way to get away from Egypt and just have some time looking at some beautiful scenery. And that's not exactly how it turned out. They didn't take the direct route. Here's how I want us to define a direct route. A direct route is the shortest distance, the most scenic route, the most popularly traveled road. God rarely takes us on the direct route, right? You've seen this in the story already. No doubt you've experienced this in your own life. There's a road that seems like the way things should go, the direction your life should take. It's the shortest distance. It's the most scenic route. It's the most popularly traveled. God, let's go right. He takes you left. That's what happens in the story. They assume they're going to take the scenic route, that it's going to be this pretty reasonable trip, but let's go back to the map, because here's where God takes them. Instead of taking them along the Way of the Sea, He takes them along this road that didn't exist called the Way of the Wilderness, and they go this way. Well, aren't they supposed to go this way? Yeah, but they go this way. They go the opposite direction. They go from Egypt to Mount Sinai, which is thought to be somewhere around here in the tip of the Sinai Peninsula. Now, we saw last week they spent about a year on Mount Sinai, around that region, and this is where God gave them the 10 Commandments. This is where He gave them instructions about just being His people. And He talked to them about the construction of the tabernacle, and He talked to them about the sacrifices and about the offerings that would be required to atone for their sins. And really, they spent a year here, I think, in large part, to just have an opportunity to detox. I mean, they had spent 400 years as slaves in Egypt. I mean, they were in Egypt as slaves longer than we have been in existence as a country. And in Egypt is a very pagan culture full of many false gods. And so for a year, God reconnects with His people, makes it clear, here's what I'm looking for from you. And then after a year, everybody's ready for the journey to continue. They're ready to get going up to the Promised Land. And so they start north and they make their way towards Canaan. And God has provided a supernatural GPS system. He's leading them with a cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. And we read in Deuteronomy chapter 1, verse 2 about how long it should take. It says it takes 11 days to go from Horeb to Kadesh Barnea, which is the south side of Canaan, if you follow Mount Seir Road. So turn right on Mount Seir Road, go straight for 11 days, and you'll hit the Promised Land. It didn't take them 11 days. It took them 39 years. That's frustrating, right? Like, have you ever started on a trip and you type in your destination and it says, here's the time that it should take. I don't know how you are, but for me, that immediately becomes a competition. Like everything in you is determined to beat the time that the GPS says is required for your journey. And so Moses pulls up, that's 11 days. I think we can beat that. I think we can do this in 10 and a half. You with me? 39 years later. Should have taken 11 days. It takes 39 years. And this time in Israel's history is known as the wandering. They wander in the wilderness. The Lord does not take them on the most direct path. Here's how I want us to define wandering. Wandering, okay, is living in the space between where I started and where I want to be. Living in the space between where I started and where I want to be. Now, here's what I've discovered. Much of life is lived out in that space. Much of your story is about the time that you live in the space between where you started and where you want to be. And maybe that's where some of you are right now. It's a space between graduating and finding your first real job. The space between dating and getting married. The space between deciding to start a family and actually having a child. The space between diagnosis and remission. The space between getting into debt and getting out of debt. The space between being let go and getting a new job. The space between saying goodbye to a loved one and being reunited with them one day. It is the space between. And here's the question for us, all of us who are living in the space between. How are you going to live? How are you going to live in the space between? What's it going to look like when you're wandering in the wilderness? See, most of us aren't very good at the journey. We're very focused on the destination. It's all about where we're going. And our approach towards the journey is what? Just get it over with. Let's just get there as fast as possible. And it's innate, right? I mean, you know this if you've got children. The most commonly asked question in the car from your kids is what? Are we there yet? How long till we get there? How many of you as parents have had a child ask you that question before you've left the neighborhood? Have you had that? Most of us have. Are we there yet? You're like, no, it's 39 more episodes of SpongeBob. We've got a long ways to go, and we don't get much better as adults. We want to rush through the journey. We don't want to spend as little as time possible in the space between where we started and where we want to be. And our objective typically is to just eliminate as much time as we can of the journey. It's all about the destination. And so we are just kind of in this constant hurry. It marks us as a culture. To help make you feel guilty about this, I'd like to give you some questions, some just true or false questions, and you assess this within your own life, okay? True or false? I've cut through a gas station to avoid stopping at a red light. Raise your hand if that's true. You're in church. Number 2, I frequently look at my watch or clock nearby. I can see you. I mean, I know that there's a lot more of you that do that than was just indicated. Number 3, people who talk slowly irritate me, don't they? If you have something to say it. Number 4, I become annoyed when the person at the checkout line in front of me chooses to pay by writing a check. What are you doing? This isn't the Flintstones. You don't have to run in your car. Use a credit card, check card. Number 5, I often find myself finishing other people's sentences for them. You know who you are. Number 6, when I am delayed and I'm running late, I become irrationally upset. You can raise your hand for your spouse if you prefer on this one, if you're brave enough. I have difficulty finding time for things like going to the doctor. Just pesky, right? Like, they should be really important, but we're in such a hurry. Number 8, I feel compelled to leave church early to beat the parking lot's rush. You don't have to raise your hand on this one. We'll wave at you on your way out. It's fine. No problem. And we are in such a hurry. We just want to get the journey over with as quickly as possible. We do everything we can to eliminate as much time as possible from the space between where we started and where we want to be. And we go on a vacation, and for me, I want to get there as quickly as possible. My wife will say, well, why are you in such a hurry to get there? What are we going to do when we get there? We're not going to do anything. We're just going to rest. Well, why do we have to get there so quickly if we're not doing anything? Why can't we just enjoy this trip? Because we need to hurry up and do nothing, right? I mean, it's just within us. But here's what you cannot miss as you read through the story. God is not in a hurry. He doesn't operate on our timetable. He has his own clock, and I don't always understand it. And so we've seen this again and again. Abraham is told, you're going to be a father of a great nation. Decades later, finally a son is born to him. And Joseph has a dream, and then he becomes a slave, and then he becomes a prisoner, and some 13 years later, finally some things start to happen. Moses, 40 years on the backside of the desert, finally one day there's a bush that is burning. We'll see this in a number of weeks where David is anointed king, and then 20 plus years later, he actually becomes king. And so for the people of Israel, it's supposed to be an 11-day journey, and it ends up taking 39 years. And I think this is the primary reason why. God is oftentimes more concerned about who you are becoming, than where you are going. He is oftentimes more concerned about who you are becoming than where you are going. We don't get that. For us, it's all about where we're going. It's all about the destination. What's next? What's next? What's next? And God says, I've got some work to do in you between now and then. And that was the case for the Israelites. They were not ready for what was next, and God is going to work in their hearts. He's going to change some things about his people. He's going to prepare them on this journey before they reach their destination. And this is hard for us, but here's the reality, is we don't like waiting, we don't like wondering, but the truth is that what happens to us while we're waiting is oftentimes more significant than whatever it is we're waiting for. That what God does in us while we're going is more important oftentimes than where we are going. That for him, the journey, the wondering is part of becoming. It's less about where we're going. It's more about who we're becoming. And so if you look at this, the people of Israel as they travel and what God does within them, one of the constant themes, in fact, the constant theme, I would say, if you just read through this in Exodus and in Numbers from beginning to end, the people respond to this living in the space between by just constantly complaining. It's just again and again and again. They are whining and they are complaining. Now, you could say that the number one problem is unbelief or lack of faith, because unbelief, lack of faith is really what causes complaining and whining. If we truly believed God, if we truly had faith that he had the situation handled, we could enjoy the journey. But when we don't have enough faith, that's when we start to complain. That's when we start to be negative and we start to whine. And you just see this again and again and again. The people are always whining about something. Commonly, it was of food. They were oftentimes whining about food. Look at Numbers 11, verse 4. Here's an example. I'm going to read this from the Message. I like the way this is paraphrased. It says, the riffraff among the people had a craving, and soon they had the people of Israel whining. So it begins with the riffraff, or the NIV says the rubble, people on the outskirts, but soon everyone in the camp is whining. And here's what they're saying: why can't we have meat? We ate fish in Egypt and we got it for free, to say nothing of the cucumbers and the melons and the leeks and the onions and the garlics, but nothing tastes good out here. It's just manna, manna, manna. It's just whining, complaining constantly. Instead of being grateful how God had provided for them miraculously, they were hungry. God provides bread, manna from heaven. He provides quail. Instead of being grateful how God had provided water, the Bible tells us in Deuteronomy that as they wandered in the wilderness, that supernaturally their sandals did not wear out and their clothes lasted. But instead of seeing things that they could be thankful for, they're just constantly whining. And notice this, that complaining is contagious. It starts with the riffraff, starts with the rubble, the people on the outskirts, but soon it's everyone. And I've seen this, and I'm sure you have as well, that it only takes one family member, right, who's just negative and complaining, and it's an infection. It only takes a couple of neighbors. It only takes a few co-workers. It only takes a handful of church members, and you just get a small group of people who whine and complain, and they make a big deal out of really little things. They're not grateful for a lot of the good things, and it just begins to spread. And it's toxic in the home and in the workplace. It's toxic in the church. And people who complain and whine, it's like they put this layer of clouds that makes it impossible for the sun to shine in. And they become this sponge that just sucks the joy and the life out of the people around them. And there's been studies done on this, just how damaging this is in our relationships. I was reading some research done by the University of Denver, and they looked at couples who had been married or they looked at the first 10 years of their marriage, and here's what they discovered, that one of the most accurate ways to predict whether or not a couple would stay together, if there were 5 or less negative comments, whining, complaining, criticism, there were 5 or less negative comments per 100 comments, then that couple had a great chance of staying together. If there were 10 or more negative comments per 100 comments, then with great predictability, you could see that the marriage wasn't going to last, that they weren't going to be happy together, that they were going to separate. And God knows what it does to His people. He knows what it does to our relationship with Him. And He's gracious again and again with the people, but eventually He has enough. You can look back and you can see just how this pattern was a part of their journey. In Exodus 16, they really were just leaving the driveway to make this trip, and already they're complaining. And here's what it says in Exodus 16. It says, "In the desert, the whole community grumbled against Moses and Aaron, and the Israelites said to them, 'If only we had died by the Lord's hand in Egypt. There we sat around pots of meat, and we ate all the food we wanted, but you brought us out into this desert to starve this entire assembly to death.'" You were slaves, right? They make it sound like Egypt was one big fondue party. Remember when we sat around the pots of meat? Remember the hibachi grill in Egypt? Wasn't that something? No, you were slaves, but this is what complaining people do. They think of every situation as being better than whatever one they're in. They remember things wrongly. They view other things with an inaccurate perspective, that everything is better than whatever it is they're going through. Now, again and again, God is gracious, and again and again, God provides. But eventually, he has enough of their complaining and whining and really a lack of faith. And in Numbers chapter 11, verse 18, God says this, "Tell the people, consecrate yourselves in preparation for tomorrow when you will eat meat. The Lord heard you when you wailed, 'If only we had meat to eat, we were better off in Egypt.' So now the Lord will give you meat, and you will eat it, and you will like it. And you will not eat it for just 1 day or 2 days or 5 or 10 or 20 days, but for a whole month until it comes out of your nostrils and you loathe it." Right? God is saying, okay, you want to see what it can be like? I'll show you what it can be like. You want it? You got it. And He's going to teach the people a pretty important lesson here in complaining and whining, that sometimes what we need is a little perspective. Just need to step back and get a little perspective to see really how much we do have to be thankful for, how much worse it could be. John Ortberg says there are 4 words that if we could just learn these 4 words, it would change the way we view life. The 4 words are, it could be worse. Typically, that's not how we look at life. We tend to think, well, I deserve better, or I would be happier if, or it's not fair, why can't I? But he says, if you just remember those 4 words, I want us to remember those 4 words. So let's say these out loud together. It could be worse on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. It could be worse. I want you to remember those to help give you some perspective. And so later today, when you go to your house, wherever it is you live, your home, your apartment, wherever it is, and you open the door, you might be tempted to think, if I lived in someone else's house, a nicer house, a newer house, a bigger house, then I would be happy. But you're not going to do that, because today you're going to say to yourself with great passion, it could be worse. Next time you step out of the shower and you make the fatal mistake of looking at yourself side view, and you think, if I had his physique, if I had her metabolism, but instead you're going to look at yourself and you're going to smile and say, and in the morning, when you wake up and you roll over and you look at your spouse, you're going to say, but here's the thing, it could be. It could be worse. Sometimes what our faith needs is a little perspective. We just need to be reminded of how blessed we are. I was on a flight to Orlando, Florida not long ago. I was by myself traveling, and I sat behind a mom and her 7 or 8 year old son, and he was sitting in the middle seat, and she was sitting in the aisle seat, and some other poor soul was sitting next to the window. And they were on their way to Disney, this mother and son. I mean, he had the shirt on, and they were excited about it initially, but then this little boy throws a temper tantrum because he wants the window seat. And so I'm kind of watching this unfold, and this guy's got his headphones on, and he's looking out the window, and he's not going to budge, and I like that. And so, and the mother is just trying to calm her son down, and she says, we're going to Disney. She just, for a half an hour, is trying to tell him all about Disneyland and what it's going to be like, and he is just so upset. You see what's happening? On the way to the Magic Kingdom, but just whining because you can't have the window seat. Does this sound familiar? On our way to heaven, but we really wanted the window seat. And we just find these things to whine and complain about. And sometimes we just need a little perspective. The father is sitting in the bleachers at his junior high son's baseball game. He becomes over the top upset when his son strikes out, and he begins to yell and curse at his son. What's wrong with you? Can't you see the blankety blank ball? And then he turns his attention to the ump, and he starts to let the ump have it. Bro, it's a beautiful day out. Your son is strong and he is healthy. You're one of the 8% of the people on the planet who owns a car that can drive and watch their son play a game. Quit whining like a little girl. Take a deep breath and say, thank you, right? Just get some perspective. And our complaining and whining shows that we forget. We don't pay attention to the ways that God has blessed us. I was reading this testimony written by a woman who went on a short-term mission trip to the island of Tobago, and she worked there for a month with a leper colony. And on the last night before she left, she got together with a group of a dozen or so of the lepers in the colony to have a time of worship, and she was going to lead them in worship. And she said, does anyone have a song they would like to sing? Anyone have a song they want to request? And she says in her story that there was a woman in the back who raised her hand, and her face was completely disfigured, and she didn't have ears or a nose or lips. And she raised her fingerless hand in the air, and she called on her and said, what song would you like to sing? And the woman said, could we sing the song, Count Your Blessings? And sometimes we just need a little perspective. Are you taking time to be thankful? Are you taking time each day to just look around and find some things that God has blessed you with? My wife's been reading a book called 1,000 Gifts by Ann Voskamp. I've not read the book, but I've seen a list around the house that is constantly growing, where my wife is making a list of 1,000 gifts from God. And I looked, I think I was number 27, but whatever. And she's just every day just writing down 2 or 3 things of what she can be thankful for. And I think this is a great practice, a great challenge to say, as an individual or perhaps as a family, that you're going to sit down and you're just going to make a list of 1,000 gifts, ways that God has blessed you. Now, the question is, why is this such a big deal to God? I mean, eventually, He's had it with the people. He allows a whole generation to die in the wilderness before entering the promised land. And the reason why God takes whining and complaining so seriously is this, that whining is the opposite of worship. It is the opposite of worship. Worship is giving God glory for who He is and what He has done. Whining is ignoring who God is and overlooking what He has done. And the reason we're living out this story is for God's glory. It's to worship Him. And he's just had enough. Numbers 14, verse 11, it says, how long will these people treat me with contempt? How long are they going to whine and complain? How long will they refuse to believe in me in spite of all the miraculous signs I've performed among them? In spite of everything I've done for them, how much longer are they going to keep whining and complaining because they don't believe in me? And I wonder how much different the story would have gone had they believed, had they put their faith in Him and worshiped. See, complaining people, here's the perspective that a complaining person has, that everything God asks them to do is too much, and everything God does for them isn't enough. Everything God asks them to do it's too much, it's a lot to ask. But everything God does for them doesn't seem to be enough. And that's the attitude of the Israelites, that in spite of everything God had done, they still complain and whine. God dramatically saved his people from years in slavery. He sent the plagues. He showed his faithfulness by splitting the Red Sea. He brought water out of a rock when they were thirsty. When they were hungry, he sent manna from heaven. Again and again, he provided, and again the people complained. It's too hot. This trip is too long. The food is too bland. They're constantly complaining about the leadership style of Moses and Aaron. And I just think that when we are living our life in the space between, we can have a tendency to do the same. God sent his only son, Jesus, to earth. Yeah, but God, I was hoping to retire this year. My portfolio is down 30%. Jesus came to earth and he walked among us and showed us how to live. Yeah, but God, I've got these wrinkles around my eyes and my hairline is... Jesus died a painful death on the cross, taking the punishment we deserved upon himself. But God, can't I have a bigger house like their house? Why can't I have a house like that one? And God is holding up the walls to the Red Sea, but we don't notice because we're looking down and complaining about the mud between our toes. So in this space between, really we have two options. Will we whine or will we worship? Let's pray.